Well, I think it started when I was a young associate at what was then Clark Klein and Beaumont
Okay.
and is now Clark Hill. And I was doing a lot of hospital reorganization work, nonprofit hospital work. And Leonard Smith was at our firm, later became full-time president of the Skillman Foundation, but he was practicing law at that time, and he was representing CMF. And he said that Dottie wanted a book, how to establish a nonprofit or how to establish a foundation in Michigan. So Leonard said, she wants me to write a book, which means you're going to write the book. So that's how I got involved originally. Having done that hospital reorg work, I pretty much learned the exempt organizations field, and it made it pretty easy to write that handbook. And that was the first one we did was kind of a loose leaf booklet, and then it grew and evolved over time, and I think it's in its 4th or 5th edition now. And CMF is still selling copies, and we've been doing updates and so forth. But having written the book, and I always say no matter how good or how bad, it makes you the expert. So that was really what kicked off my involvement with CMF and doing a lot of private foundation and community foundation work. Well, I think manufacturing makes Michigan work. That was the motto that the Michigan Manufacturers Association had for a long time. And we have such a strong historically such a strong manufacturing base, which meant that we had a lot of wealth that was created by manufacturing and a lot of talented people. And that converted over to philanthropy. I think the CEOs and founders of these manufacturing organizations were interested in philanthropy, and they devoted their own time and energy to foundations or local charities. So I really think it derives from people like W.K. Kellogg and Henry Ford and the Dodge brothers and all the great industry titans who devoted their own resources after they became successful to philanthropy. The one thing that's come through is that they want to give back to the community. They feel that their success, their financial success, is drawn from the community, and it's usually local charity too. They're not interested in doing national things. They want to keep it in the local community, so they really feel like they're giving back for the success that they've enjoyed. That's a common theme. They mostly worry about the next generation and the third generation. It's really when you get to the third generation that these foundations start to splinter, because that's the generation that seems to spread out around the country, and they don't have that local involvement. So they really worry about the dynamic of keeping the philanthropy local, but at the same time ensuring that there's going to be family control. And we've had this talk with a number of foundations. You really can't have it both ways. You have to decide, is it donor intent, which means letting loose on family control and getting more local leader involvement in the family foundation? Or do you really want to keep family control, which means the likelihood that the foundation may splinter and split up, or else broaden its scope beyond the local community? Those are the choices that the first and second generation have to make, and it's very, very difficult. Well, the community foundations came up with this great idea. In fact, it was here in Kalamazoo, wasn't it? Jack Hopkins, who came up with the idea of having a credit for gifts to community foundations. So we all knew what community foundations were, because it was a pretty well-defined group within CMF. But a lot of other people in the state liked the idea and decided that they were going to set up community foundations that, in name, but not really structured the way that we considered community foundations. So we had some local municipal foundations created that called themselves community foundations, and then we learned that we had to really fine-tune the definition and focus more on endowment. That's what community foundations do, is build endowment for the community. So we put that into the definition. And we did a number of other things to really fine-tune the definition so that it was clear that our conception of what a community foundation was reflected properly in the statute.
Do you think it's been successful?
Oh, I think so. I think so. So many more people know about community foundations now and have a better understanding of what they are because of that tax credit. This is the last year, and a lot of us are sad about that, but we're going to put the push on to get the word out and look at it as a last hurrah to introduce more people to the credit and to community foundation. Well, Dottie Johnson was a very dynamic leader of CMF, and she was very high profile and was very comfortable talking to legislators and governors and elected officials. And it was never, she didn't treat it as if she were lobbying. It was just getting to know people and making sure that they understood the great work that foundations, both private foundations and community foundations, were doing in the state. And I think that kind of set the tone for CMF because Rob Collier has followed in her footsteps, and he is one of the most effective spokespersons that we have, not just in Michigan, but on the national scene. He's very active with the Council on Foundations, and he's a real strong leader in Washington for our foundations. And, you know, Rob does it the same way that Dottie did it. People don't think of Rob as a lobbyist, and he would kill me if he heard me use that word, but he is very, very effective in telling the story of community foundations. Well, I think they've been very successful in getting great volunteer leadership and good boards. And as I said earlier, you know, a lot of times when manufacturing is involved, you'll get high-profile CEOs and really well-qualified high-level executives to come from these organizations and serve on the board. And, you know, to their credit, they feel that community involvement is very important as a value for their respective companies. So they're not afraid to roll up their sleeves and get involved. And that raises the bar. And that makes staff work harder and be a little more astute at what's going on with the organization. So I think it just trickles down from there. We've always had great volunteer leadership in Michigan. Respect was always a part of the equation, and they would respectfully disagree with one another, even though they were disagreeing vehemently. But at the end of the day, everybody remained friends, and it wasn't such a strong disagreement that they didn't get along. I think Dottie probably called me up and said, we've got this grant from Kellogg, and Kellogg wants to bring philanthropy through community foundations all across the state of Michigan, including the UP. So get ready, because you and Kathy are going to get on the road. And, you know, the first thing that we did was after I had written the book, Establishing a Charitable Foundation in Michigan, Miriam Nolan and Leonard Smith and I got on the road and went all around the state to promote creation of foundations and community foundations. And then the next step was the youth project, where Kellogg Foundation made funds available to community foundations to create these youth advisory committees. And we got to know lots of folks in lots of little towns, including the UP, all around the state. And it was always great because they were community leaders who were involved with the community foundation. So you'd always meet really nice, helpful people. And that's the great thing about my own law practice, is working with nonprofits and foundations. It's always people that have good hearts. And it sure beats litigation, I can tell you that. You know, I think when We introduced the concept of getting young people involved in philanthropy. That was something that really took off. People at community foundations really understood how important it was to introduce that concept to young people, and it's been a great success. Are we going to talk about Learning to Give? Well, and then Learning to Give put together a curriculum, or I don't know, hundreds of curricula around philanthropy through the involvement of teachers, most importantly, who got involved and helped write the curricula, and that has taken off just incredibly. The teachers love, I think, teaching philanthropy, and the students eat it up. My own sister-in-law is a principal, and I told her about Learning to Give, and she checked it out on the website, and she said, this is the greatest thing. She was really tickled that she found that website and could introduce it in her school. Well, I went to University of Michigan to get my undergrad degree, and then I decided to go to Notre Dame Law School. I also got my MBA at Notre Dame, and those are two really different institutions. Michigan is very large and can be very liberal, and Notre Dame is small and not so liberal. And part of the Notre Dame experience was teaching the ethics of the law. That's an important part of the curriculum there. And that kind of ties in with the whole nonprofit sector, at least in my mind. So I had a certain comfort level when I started doing nonprofit work, when I started my practice at Clark Line. So it felt like a natural evolution to me. And the thing that I learned about working with nonprofits is that people all across the spectrum in the nonprofit world wanted to cooperate and help one another. And you just don't see that in the business world because people are naturally very confidential about everything that's going on at their companies. And they're concerned that they might give a competitive advantage to somebody else if they shared some secrets or a better way of doing things. And that just is not how the nonprofit world works. So that was very refreshing and very appealing. And Kathy knows you can pick up the phone and call anybody at a nonprofit, and all they want to do is help. It's a great thing about the nonprofit sector. No, I don't think so. I think it was more just the whole issue of values and giving back that we learned about. And the concern with lawyers, of course, is always doing the client's bidding and not stepping back and looking at the bigger picture and understanding what the right thing to do is. And that was emphasized quite a bit at Notre Dame. So it was a great background for working in the nonprofit sector. Well, I think, if at a family level, my involvement with different nonprofits, I think, has been a good lesson for our kids. They see that we're involved in lots of different activities and want to give back to the community. So I think that's made an impression on them. They understand that, which is probably not true for a lot of the kids that they go to school with. Yeah, most of what we did revolved around the parish that we lived in, and we all went to Catholic school, and that's where most of the involvement was with charity. Well, and it's hard when you're in a smaller town like Midland or Battle Creek or Kalamazoo, because the likelihood that the next generation is going to move is stronger than if you're in a larger urban area. So that makes it even more difficult. But the irony is often the family is even closer to the community because it is a small town. So it makes it particularly poignant, I think. The one thing that comes to mind is the fact that we've had a depressed economy in Michigan for some years now. And that's put a lot of pressure, I think, on the foundation community because they're expected to do more. And because the economy's depressed, the state and local government have fewer resources available to them, so they look to the nonprofit community to do more. And it's just a vicious circle with really no end in sight. That I think that has had a really significant impact on the nonprofit sector in our state. Yes. I think they feel the pressure. There's an intensity now that wasn't there necessarily years ago. Trying always to do more with less, and you get into that vicious cycle where the government expects more. The state and local governments expect more. The nonprofits have fewer resources and they're spread more thin than they have been in the past. And the people who do the funding have fewer resources available to them too. So I think it's probably more challenging today than it has been in a very, very long time. Yeah, it was probably the story that Kathy told me.
Go ahead and tell us.
When she talked about how she didn't like to fly. And she said, you think about these planes and how big and how heavy they are, and they're loaded with people and luggage, and it just doesn't make common sense that that thing is going to get off the ground. There's only one reason that planes do fly. It's because everybody who's on the plane believes.
That's right. Treat up.
Well, we're that way in the community foundation world too.
Yes.
Everybody believes, and that's the reason that community foundations have been such a great success, because we all believe.